"Sit down and be quiet," my husband said, loud enough for the whole veterans banquet to hear. "You have no idea who you're sitting among." The laughter around our table came quickly, sharp and easy. Mark smiled like he had protected the room from me. His mother lowered her eyes instead of defending me. I did not answer. I only rested my hand over the small black box beside my plate, the one holding my old Raven watch mission patch. Across the room, a retired admiral stopped mid-conversation. His face changed the moment he saw it. Then he stood up and asked, "Where did you get that patch?" "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was 42 years old that night, and for most of my adult life, I had worn a Navy uniform. Not on television, not in recruiting posters, not in the kinds of roles people like to brag about at cocktail parties. I spent most of my career in naval intelligence, working in security assessments, operational planning, and assignments that rarely made headlines. That was fine with me. The work was never about recognition. It was about responsibility. After leaving active duty, I built a quieter life. I taught part-time, volunteered with veterans, and tried to leave certain chapters of my past where they belonged. That should have been enough. But for my husband, it never seemed to be. Mark wasn't a bad man when I married him. At least, I didn't think so. He was ambitious, charming, and confident. People liked being around him. The problem was that Mark needed to be the most important person in every room he entered. And whenever someone showed interest in my military background, something changed in him. A joke would appear, a dismissive comment, a sarcastic smile. Sarah wasn't exactly kicking down doors. Most of her work was paperwork. Government people love making themselves sound important. Little things, small enough to deny, large enough to hurt. For years, I convinced myself it wasn't intentional, until it became impossible to ignore. Even his mother, Elaine, occasionally encouraged it. "Men need to feel respected," she once told me. What she really meant was that I should make myself smaller. I learned to stop talking about my service. I stopped correcting people. I stopped explaining. People mistake silence for surrender, but silence is often just exhaustion. Earlier that afternoon, while getting ready for the banquet, I had taken a small black box from the back of my closet. Inside was an old mission patch. Raven watch, a piece of fabric most people would never recognize. I almost left it at home. Something told me not to. When Mark saw it in my hand, he sighed. "Please don't start telling military stories tonight," he said while adjusting his tie. Then he looked directly at me. "Just let me do the talking." An hour later, we walked into the hotel ballroom, and before the night was over, that decision would become the biggest mistake of his life. The ballroom was packed with nearly 200 people. Retired officers, defense contractors, veterans, military families, and local officials filled the round tables beneath crystal chandeliers. A Navy band played softly near the stage, while servers moved between tables, carrying trays of wine and appetizers. Mark loved rooms like this, rooms with audiences. Within 20 minutes of arriving, he had already gathered a small circle around our table. I sat quietly beside him, exactly where he wanted me. A defense consultant asked about the small black box near my purse. "What's that?" he said. Before I could answer, Mark laughed. "Oh, that's one of Sarah's old military souvenirs." A few people smiled politely. I kept my eyes on my water glass. The consultant looked interested. "Really? What unit was it from?" "Again," Mark answered for me. You'd have to ask the Pentagon. Everything sounds dramatic when intelligence people tell stories. The group laughed. Not cruelly, just enough. The kind of laughter that tells you people have already decided who to believe. I felt Elaine watching me from across the table. She didn't join the laughter. She didn't stop it either. The consultant leaned forward. So, what did you actually do in the Navy? I opened my mouth. Mark cut in immediately. Paperwork, security reviews, reports. Nothing that would make a movie. More laughter. A champagne glass lifted. Someone nodded. Someone else changed the subject. I had spent years learning that correcting people like that rarely changed anything. People hear what they want to hear, so I stayed quiet. Then, while reaching for my napkin, I accidentally brushed the black box. It tipped over. The lid opened. The Raven watch patch slid onto the white tablecloth. The room didn't notice. One person did. Across the aisle, Admiral Thomas Hale froze. Actually froze. His conversation stopped in the middle of a sentence. His eyes locked onto the patch. For several seconds, he didn't move. Then he slowly stood. A strange silence settled over the people nearest him. Mark didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying himself. You know, he said loudly, Sarah always acts like that patch is something special. A few people chuckled again. Then Admiral Hale began walking toward our table. Every step seemed deliberate. Every conversation near him faded. For the first time all evening, I felt something shift. Not in the room, in him. The Admiral stopped beside our table and stared directly at the patch. Then he looked at me, and what he said next made the smile disappear from Mark's face. "Commander Mitchell," he said quietly, "where have you been all these years?" The room fell quiet. Not completely. Just enough for people to realize something unusual was happening. Mark blinked. "I'm sorry," he said with an awkward laugh. "I think you've mistaken my wife for someone else." Admiral Hale never looked at him. His attention remained on me. "Commander Sarah Mitchell," he repeated. "Naval Intelligence." I hadn't heard that title spoken aloud in years. For a moment, I was back in a briefing room, surrounded by maps, reports, and people whose names never appeared in newspapers. I stood slowly. "Good to see you again, Admiral." The expression on his face softened. "You disappeared?" "I retired," I said. "No," he replied. "You walked away." Several guests exchanged confused looks. Mark's smile was beginning to crack. "Commander," someone at the table asked. I could feel dozens of eyes turning toward me. The Admiral picked up the Raven watch patch from the tablecloth, carefully, respectfully, as if it meant something, because it did. "This isn't a souvenir," he said. The room became even quieter. I noticed a photographer lower his camera. A waiter stopped moving beside a nearby table. Mark shifted in his chair. "Look, Admiral, I think this is being blown out of proportion." The Admiral ignored him again. Then he turned toward the guests. 20 years ago, during a security crisis in Bahrain, a small intelligence team was responsible for protecting a diplomatic evacuation route. Nobody laughed now. Nobody moved. I knew exactly where this was going. The heat, the chaos, the radio traffic, the decision. A convoy had been heading toward a route we later learned had been compromised. Information was incomplete. Time was running out. Someone had to choose. I had redirected the movement based on fragmented intelligence that didn't fully make sense yet. For 6 terrifying minutes, I wasn't sure if I had just saved lives or doomed them. The alternative route proved correct. The original route was attacked less than an hour later. I never talked about it because dozens of people had made that operation possible. It was never my story alone. The Admiral looked around the room. That decision prevented a disaster. My stomach tightened. I hated being the center of attention. Always had. Then Admiral Hale looked directly at Mark. Many of us went home because of officers like your wife. The silence became absolute. The air conditioning hummed overhead. Somewhere in the ballroom, a glass touched a plate. No one spoke. Then the Admiral delivered the sentence that changed everything. That patch represents one of the most respected operations I've ever reviewed. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. Then Mark made the mistake that ended whatever control he still had over the room. He laughed, a short, nervous laugh. "Come on," he said. "We're talking about something that happened 20 years ago. Sarah has always had a talent for making ordinary things sound important." The words hung in the air. Nobody joined him, not one person. For the first time all night, he had no audience left. I watched him glance around the table, looking for support, looking for someone to smile. Nobody did. Admiral Hale's expression hardened. "Ordinary?" he asked quietly. Mark swallowed. The Admiral reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a folded document. I recognized it immediately. A copy of the commendation letter issued after the Bahrain operation. I hadn't seen one in years. Mark's face lost color. The Admiral unfolded the paper. "I keep this because my nephew was in that convoy." The room went completely silent. A champagne glass froze halfway to someone's lips. The photographer lowered his camera. Even Elaine stared at the document. The Admiral continued. "Commander Mitchell's recommendation. Change the evacuation route." He looked directly at Mark. "My nephew came home because of that decision." Mark opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then the Admiral read a passage from the letter. "Not the whole thing. Just enough. Enough to confirm my name. My rank. My role. The truth." The silence that followed felt heavier than any applause. I finally spoke. My voice was calm, steady. I never needed people to admire what I did. Every eye in the room turned toward me. I just needed the people closest to me not to mock it. No one looked away, especially not Mark. Then Elaine surprised everyone, including herself. She slowly set down her wine glass. "Mark knew," she said. The room shifted again. Mark's head snapped toward her. His face drained completely. Elaine looked exhausted. "He found the Navy letter years ago. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. He asked me not to mention it. He said people would stop seeing him first if they knew who Sarah really was." The words landed harder than the commendation letter, because this wasn't ignorance. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was a choice, a deliberate one. Mark lowered his eyes. For years, he hadn't minimized my service because he doubted it. He had minimized it because he believed my accomplishments made him look smaller. The truth was finally standing in the middle of the room, and nobody could pretend not to see it anymore. I looked at the wedding band on my finger. Then I slowly removed it and placed it beside the Raven watch patch. The silence lasted several long seconds. Mark stared at the wedding ring lying beside the Raven watch patch. For once, he had nothing clever to say. No joke, no explanation, no audience, just the truth. "Sarah," he finally whispered. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. I was wrong. I looked at him. For years, I had imagined hearing those words. I thought they would feel satisfying, victorious. They didn't. They felt late, painfully late. Because an apology means something different when it arrives before the damage is done. The room remained still. Nobody interrupted. Nobody tried to rescue him. Mark swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I was jealous." The honesty surprised me, even now. It didn't change anything. I nodded slowly. "I know." A few people lowered their eyes. Others simply watched. I picked up the Raven watch patch and closed my hand around it. Then I looked at my husband, the man I had spent years protecting from embarrassment, the man who had spent years protecting himself from my success. "You didn't hurt me because you didn't know who I was," I said quietly. My voice never rose. "You hurt me because you did." The words seemed to take the air out of him. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy. I was simply finished shrinking, finished explaining, finished apologizing for taking up space. Admiral Hale stepped forward. The old officer stood straighter than men half his age. Then, in front of everyone in that ballroom, he offered me a formal salute, not dramatic, not theatrical, just sincere, the kind of salute earned through service. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I returned it. The room watched in complete silence. Some people quietly applauded. Others stood. I didn't. This wasn't a victory lap. It was closure. I slipped the patch back into its box and picked up my purse. Mark looked as if he wanted to say something else. Maybe he did. Maybe he finally understood. But understanding and repairing are not the same thing. "I hope you find peace, Mark," I said. Then I walked toward the ballroom doors. Behind me, the conversation slowly returned. Ahead of me, the night air waited. For years, people had mistaken my silence for weakness. They were wrong. Silence had never been surrender. It had been dignity. And that night, dignity finally spoke for itself. If this story touched you, take a moment to think about the times someone underestimated you simply because you chose dignity over noise. Sometimes the strongest people in the room are the ones who never feel the need to prove themselves. I'd love to know which moment stayed with you the most. Was it the Admiral recognizing Sarah? The hidden truth finally coming out? Or the quiet strength she showed when she chose self-respect over revenge? Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your stories and experiences help build a community that values honor, courage, and truth. And if stories about dignity, strength, military honor, and quiet justice mean something to you, please like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Thank you for listening. One of the most valuable lessons in life is that your worth does not depend on who recognizes it. There will be people who misunderstand you, underestimate you, or even try to make you feel smaller so they can feel bigger. But true strength comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let others define your value. Stay faithful to your principles, protect your dignity, and remember that character is built in the moments when no one is applauding. If this story spoke to you, leave a comment and share the lesson that resonated most with you. And if you enjoy stories about honor, resilience, and quiet strength, be sure to subscribe and join our growing community.